Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Okay, so I have a very small and technical question for you, but I'm curious. We have interviewed, interviewed the expert Nathan Bryan, Dr. Nathan Bryan, about nitric oxide. And he mentioned the lozenge that has been found useful in helping the body generate nitric oxide, in addition to eating leafy green vegetables and beets and all of that stuff.
Yes.
Here it is. And you and I actually discussed it more than a year ago.
Yeah.
So this is a lozenge. Unfortunately, a company makes it and they want to sell it. So they want to make it taste good. So they made it much too sweet for my taste. I could have eaten it. But anyway, it's sweet, but it's very small. Now, this is where the minutia comes in. If somebody has this in the morning, is it already, enough sugar in that to kick them out of, the fasting?
I don't know how much sugar's in the box, but, when you have normal blood sugar, you're talking about maybe, 4 or 5 teaspoons of sugar in your blood at any given time. So there's not a lot of sugar in your blood. Again, it would depend on how many grams. It might be better to take that at the end of the fast, meaning take that at noon when you break your fast. And another thing I do, and some people like to put some collagen protein into their coffee to give the precursors for the body to build more collagen. And there's a lot of, good evidence that that's good for your skin and for your other organs, for your bones. That's a good thing. When I do that, I generally do that just before I have lunch, because if I put it into my bulletproof coffee, the body can take that protein and it can turn it into glucose. So it's not, and you can kind of break your fast. So that's a nuanced thing, but I'd rather take my collagen protein at the end of my fast, just before I eat, maybe a half an hour before lunch, than I would to take it at 7 in the morning, because I know some of those factory forming and some of those cells are going to go, oh, we have some amino acids. Turn it on. Let's build. Let's build some proteins. So I guess, it's not a yes or no. It's really a matter of how much of an effect you get. And my guess would be, a teaspoon of sugar is going to bring down the effect a little bit. And, 15 grams of protein is going to bring down the effect more. So, because I love to optimize things, I'll take my collagen protein just before I break the fast.
Makes perfect sense. So you and I talked to, and again, nitric oxide.
Yes.
We talked about breathing through the nose. I interviewed James Nestor, and Patrick McEwen. When Patrick McEwen was talking about being able to tolerate more CO2 and holding our breath, it occurred to me, and I think I heard somebody talk about it actually, somebody that I think that we talk about intermittent fasting, but also it can apply to breathing.
Sure, intermittent hypoxia for sure.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, and I think there are some interesting benefits from becoming hypoxic intermittently. And anytime you are exercising beyond your aerobic capacity, so your cells want to take oxygen and glucose, or oxygen and fatty acids, and burn them aerobically. So it's oxidative phosphorylation, of course. But when you need more energy than you can make that way, then the body switches over to glycolysis, where it actually ferments that glucose molecule. It only makes 2 or 3 ATP per glucose instead of making 33 or 36, but you can still make energy. And that's when you go anaerobic, because you don't have enough oxygen coming in to keep up. And one of the reaction products causes the pH in your cells to drop. So that lactic acid builds up. And eventually it makes you stop running because your legs are on fire. They're burning because you've gone anaerobic for too long. But when you do interval training, generally you're really pushing it, and maybe you are getting some intermittent hypoxia where you're pushing, the cells to kind of go anaerobic to supplement what they can do in terms of burning, through the mitochondria, the normal pathway. So you can always make energy with your mitochondria, but you can always make energy. In fact, your red blood cells have no mitochondria. They work only by, fermenting the glucose, to lactic acid by splitting it that way. So, and I hope I didn't get too technical.
No. This is all useful and fascinating, and it's lovely to hear your scientific depth. But we talked about, and he talked about, and you and I talked about the fact that sauna. You said cryo, and that's another. You hit the body with a stressor, and the body.
Yes.
Sauna. I do want to go into the subject of saunas with you. So now, sure. Many of us don't go to the gym anymore. We don't go to the spa anymore. We don't have access to those saunas, but there are numerous home saunas we can buy. They're usually of the infrared variety. And there seem to be two camps. And you go to the bookstore, you can see 20 books on each one. One says absolutely far infrared is what you need. Far infrared is it. And then there's one camp that says near infrared is it. Now we know that far infrared will heat you up. So you sweat. So that's a good thing. But near infrared has, the penetration. So can you talk a little bit about this? Because sure. Let's say that I want to buy a sauna. Do I buy a far infrared? Do I buy something that has both? And does it really have both?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So you have to be careful because, and I'm not knocking them, but if a company decides to build a far infrared sauna, they're going to focus all their information on the benefits of that. And if a different company builds a near infrared sauna, they're going to talk about all the advantages of that. And that's just how business is. I mean, people that sell Lexuses don't talk about how nice those BMWs are. I mean, you have two different groups. And yet, I guess for me, I'm greedy. I want the far infrared because the longer wavelengths are going to penetrate more deeply in the body. And I am going to heat up. And part of the benefit for the sauna, I bought an infrared sauna in like 2008 or so. So I've been using it every week for the last 12 years, and I love it. It was a far infrared sauna. However, so that's great. I sweat a ton. I always bring into the sauna, let me grab this. I always bring in a half gallon of water with electrolytes. And I sit there and I drink a half gallon of water with some magnesium and maybe a few other electrolytes, mostly magnesium. And I sweat a huge amount and I feel great. However, I did follow the research on near IR and I said, this is real. So the near, let me see if I can say this simply. You burn things through electron transfer, meaning if I take some oil and I light it on fire, the fundamental chemistry is just oxygen ripping electrons off of that and making carbon dioxide and water and releasing a ton of energy. We don't have a fire in our cells. Those electrons get transferred from complex to complex in your mitochondria, but the energy is released. But the last point, the last complex, nitric oxide, which is a great molecule, it's a potent vasodilator. It's critical to lowering your blood pressure, male reproduction. There's a lot of benefits of nitric oxide in the body. But nitric oxide can stick to that last complex. And when it does, when it binds there, that shuts that battery charger down and it stops making ATP. So what they found is that the near infrared, there's a certain wavelength that complex absorbs, and boom, it releases the nitric oxide and it opens up that channel. So now you can make energy again. So about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I added some near infrared sources in my far infrared sauna because I'm greedy and I want it all. So I still get that incredible sweat, and I get the vasodilation of my quads and my calves and my hamstrings. I get all those benefits, but I find that by adding the near infrared on top of it, it sparks me up. Like I have more energy, more electricity. I'm making more ATP, which to me is awesome. So I believe you want both. And then there are companies, and again, I'm not talking about anyone in particular, that will say we have full spectrum. Be careful, because the marketing guys will say we want full spectrum, and the R&D guys will say, well, we could add this, but it's only going to put out a tiny amount of near infrared. And the marketing people say it doesn't matter, we can call it full spectrum. So if you get one that's full spectrum, you really want them to look, you want to see what the irradiance is at all the different wavelengths. And irradiance is just a fancy word for how many photons are you getting at 700? How many are you getting at 720, 800, 900, 1100, 1400? So you really need to know how much you're getting, not the fact that there's a little tiny bit so the marketing people could say, oh, it's full spectrum.
Yes.
No, you really need to know, is it enough to be of biological significance? So in my case, I made sure that I added a couple of substantial, near infrared sources, and I'm getting ample irradiation in that wavelength region to, help me with those biological processes and releasing the nitric oxide. And on the other side, I get the far infrared as well. So that's my take on it. I'm not an expert in infrared saunas, but I am a user, and I've done it for 12 years. And I knew what my baseline was, and I know what happened when I added the near infrared. So I've talked to a lot of people that I have encouraged to buy saunas and said, here's how you go from great to wow. So that's how I see it.
Okay, so you have a far infrared sauna, you looked at the benefit of near, you put a couple of near sources inside of your far. I wonder, why wouldn't there be just logically a company that would say, here's what John did, let's make it nicer and more tight. Let's create one from the get-go that has the far and the near sources in the good quantities. Logically, to me, it seems like there would be somebody who had done it.
And it may exist. It may exist and it may be out there. I'm just saying, if somebody tells you it's full spectrum, you really want to see the solar irradiance at all the wavelengths to see, is it full spectrum to the marketing department, or is it really full spectrum in terms of your biology? Hey, Adiel, one other thing, I love the effects of nitric oxide in the body. It's a great molecule. I think eating beets, taking concentrated beets, or taking the Neo 40, those are all can have significant benefits in terms of lowering your blood pressure, vasodilation, a lot of good things. But there's one watch out, and that is I don't want to create a certain nitrogen-free radical or reactive nitrogen species in my body. And the way I block that, or the way I quench that, is I make sure I'm getting enough gamma tocopherol. Now, if you remember, I've told you gamma tocopherol is critical to help prevent prostate cancer. And I think part of the reason for that is, maybe some slice of the reason is that because it can quench this particular free radical, which is very problematic for the prostate. So if you are taking, these products to raise your nitric oxide level, I would make sure that at least twice a week, you're taking some gamma tocopherol to quench, because that's the negative side of nitric oxide in the body. So, you know, like I said, too much water will kill you. You need to get everything in the right range, and you don't want to have those negative effects. So that's why I want to understand it molecularly, because I know I want this effect, but I don't want the negative side effect. You know, how can I address that?
That's an amazing tip, and thank you so much for it. And you did talk about that on our show, you know, the public television show. But I'm going to make just one reference again to the infrared. There is material out there about red, not infrared, but red.
Yes, visible. Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about that? If you have encountered it?
I've only looked at it at a high level, so I haven't done a detailed review. Just want to say that up front. I think that the visible spectrum starts at 400 and ends at 700. So that 400 to 700 is what we can see. I think that wavelengths between 400 and 700 have biological effects. Just to be clear, to the body, there's no such thing as ultraviolet, you know, UVC, UVB, UVA, visible, infrared. Those are all humans that have named all those different, it's all just photons. And those photons interact with your biological system. Sometimes they do good things, like when they knock that nitric oxide off of that complex on your mitochondria. And sometimes they do bad things, like when you absorb a UVB photon and it cross-links your DNA. So I definitely think that red light can have benefits, but I'm not an expert in it, and I haven't looked at it in detail. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So again, I mean, John, right now we are still in the time of COVID.
Yes.
And I know that clearly you have some ideas, and I'm sure your ideas, at least to me, would be far more beneficial than many others, ideas, including doctors. So I would love to hear your take.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So back on March 5th, I did a live training, and I said that at that point, 3,000 people, I believe, had died worldwide from COVID-19. And from my review of the scientific literature, I made the point that I said, my guess is that if you looked closely at those 3,000 people that have been taken by the disease, that many of them would be low in vitamin D. And I did that based on the research on the original SARS. And I think that if you look at what they saw in New Orleans, what they saw in the Philippines, what they saw in Singapore, that was true. But there's a couple of things that most people haven't seen yet, because the news media doesn't pay attention to the right studies. The first one was done, it was a collaborative effort between BU Medical School in Boston and Quest Diagnostics, which is one of the largest testing companies in the US. And they looked at 191,000 Americans, all latitudes, Maine to Florida, all races, both sexes, all ages. And they saw the same effect. And this was not, do you have a severe case or a mild case, but do you ever test positive? And what they showed is that if you went from having normal vitamin D above 30, let's say 32 nanograms per milliliter, if your vitamin D dropped down to 20, your risk of testing positive went up 54%. Now, if they had a study, I wear a mask, and I think there's a benefit to wearing a mask, but there's no study that says that you can cut your risk by 54% by putting the mask on. But yet we have 191,000 people across the country, all ages, where they see that exact same curve. And so to me, we should be addressing people's vitamin D. We should be measuring it and making sure that people supplement appropriately to get above 32 nanograms per milliliter, which in nanomoles per liter is about 80. So if you're in Europe, if you're in Japan, it'll be in nanomoles per liter. And I like to keep mine between 40 and 50. Just so you know, the normal range goes from 30 to 100. So I'm still talking about being in the lower part of the normal range, but that's a huge effect. And the second one is in Spain in October, so just a couple months ago, they did a randomized controlled trial on RCT. They had, I think, 76 people that came into the hospital sequentially. They broke them into two groups. Both groups got what they considered to be the best available therapy. But the treatment group, in addition to best available therapy, they gave them a 0.5 milligram of 25-OH vitamin D, which is the first metabolite that your body makes. And that's a pretty substantial dose. Then they said, how many of these people are going to end up in intensive care? And how many of these people are going to pass away? And this is the part that just took my breath away, that should be all over the news around the world. In the control group that got best available therapy, 50% of those people ended up in the ICU. And of those people, 15% of them died. When they looked at the treatment group, they got the exact same treatment, but a 0.5 milligram of 25-OHD, 2% ended up in the ICU, and no one died. Now, it's not a big study, but the statistics, everything was statistically significant. It was a huge thing. So when I look at the Quest Diagnostics BU study, and I look at the work that came out of Spain, if our government was on top of this, they would be testing people's vitamin D levels and having them supplement appropriately. And guess what? What are the two groups that tend to have the lowest vitamin D levels? The elderly, particularly in nursing homes, because they don't get a lot of sun. And even if they do get sun, their skin only makes 1/3 of what it used to. And people that have more melanin in their skin. So if you have melanin in your skin, if you're African American, if you're Indian, if you're from Southeast Asia or whatever, those photons that you need to make vitamin D get absorbed by melanin, which is the natural sunscreen. It's like a 315 nanometer photon that you use. Melanin is your body's natural sunscreen. So the more melanin you have, the harder it is to make vitamin D. So if you look at the data on those studies and you look at who has been hit hardest by COVID-19, I'm not saying vitamin D is the only factor, but I do believe it's a big factor and we should be all over this. And just one last thing before we leave that. When you buy vitamin D in the bottle or you make it photochemically in your skin, it does nothing. And you're like, what? No, that's the starting material. And the body has to take it through 2 conversions to turn it into active vitamin D. And both those conversions require magnesium. And if you look at the NHANES data, more than half of all Americans are magnesium deficient. If you don't have enough magnesium, you can't convert the vitamin D. So if somebody's taking vitamin D, I like to make sure that they're getting maybe 250 milligrams of magnesium each day, so that way they can convert it to the active form that can save your life. So I'm just I don't want to get into too much detail. I did a whole presentation for one of the state agencies in Ohio, and it's on my Facebook professional page. If you go to Facebook and you look up Dr. Sottery, they can watch it, they can see the studies, they can see the links, the whole 9 yards. But I just wanted to pull those 2 things out of there. There's a bunch of other things that you can do. We could talk for 40 minutes on that, but those 2 things are just too critical right now because this is killing us. And what we're doing isn't working. I predicted in September, now that vitamin D levels start to drop, I said, COVID is going to come back now with a vengeance. And, I don't want to be right, but that's exactly what we're seeing.
So John,
and your vitamin D goes, yeah.
Actually, I interviewed an infectious disease specialist and I asked him straight up, when those doctors stand in front of the TV cameras and talk to the whole country, why don't they talk about vitamin D? And now you said magnesium is also simple things, hardly cost, they don't cost very much. They're very cheap. In fact, he said, I don't want to be cynical, but nobody makes money off of it.
Yeah.
That's very sad.
If the remdesivir data was as good as the vitamin D data, remdesivir, it would be all around the planet because that's $1,000 a dose. I mean, again, it's just economics, but you have to step back and say, people are dying. People are having long-term effects in their heart, in their lungs. We have to get on top of it. And this is a significant part of the problem, and we need to deal with it. I mean, I don't want, in that talk I put on Facebook, I found Dr. Fauci actually did an interview on Instagram with Jennifer Garner, the actress. And at the, 30-minute point, she asked him about supplements, and he said, well, vitamin D can, significantly reduce your risk of infection. I think he was talking about all respiratory infections, including COVID, and that vitamin C was helpful as well. And I feel like saying, you gotta get this on TV, on all the networks, in a briefing. You gotta tell people this. Because like you said, it's 10 or 15 cents a day for the vitamin D, and it's 20 cents a day for the magnesium. That's it. And not only will it help you in terms of COVID, but it'll help you for the flu. It'll help you reduce the risk of many cancers. It'll help you, the magnesium helps you make more ATP. I mean, the people that are getting killed a lot of them are the ones with low vitamin D and low magnesium. And we got to fix it.
Okay, so John, I know that we have people that are listening to this who are the ambitious type. They just heard about magnesium. You said that at least 250 milligram a day. They're going to say, well, I'm going to take more. Is there a limit where it starts to be a little bit not so good for you?
Yeah, the US government, if you go to the CDC website, they suggest an upper limit for supplemental magnesium of 350 milligrams a day. So that's their suggested upper limit. 100 years ago, most Americans got 500 milligrams of magnesium a day from their diet. Now the average American gets half that amount. So that's why I said 250 is probably a reasonable number. You might want to ramp up to that. The other thing I forgot to mention is the form of magnesium matters. Magnesium oxide is the most widely used form of magnesium, and it's very inexpensive and it's very concentrated, so you can make a small pill. Unfortunately, the studies say that only 4% of the magnesium and magnesium oxide gets absorbed by the body, which means 96% just passes through you. I would suggest that people look at, magnesium citrate, magnesium chloride, or one of the chelated magnesiums that are much better absorbed by the body. So, and we could throw that in the show notes too if you want. I'm happy to do that.
Well, John, obviously you are a treasure trove of information, knowledge, research backed by science. I'm going to take a greedy approach here for our viewers and say, this is not you, this is me.
Sure.
John, how can we benefit from your ongoing research, from your ongoing finding? You mentioned that you have a Facebook. How else can we reach your great information?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I started on this road because I wanted to blaze a new trail in terms of what was possible for HealthSpan. So I said, what is possible for somebody that is 60 years old or 70 years old or whatever, because I know the normal approach is you get to 40 and then you're on a downward glide path, and you can't go windsurfing, you can't go backpacking, you can't go paddleboarding because you have too much pain or you don't have the energy. So I'm all about health span, and I wanted to do it, and I'm my first customer. But what I realized is I could spend my whole life just talking to people and helping them get, these are the right strategies, these are the right supplements, these are the watch outs, this is the kind of blood work you want to do to see what your issues are. So I started a monthly membership earlier this year, actually just before the whole COVID thing hit. And if they just go to johnsottery.com, so JOHNSOTTERY, johnsottery.com, there's a brief description of my membership, and everything is recorded. So if you don't get to see me live, you have access to all my content. I did one a couple months back. I asked the membership, and I said, you want to know what I do for skincare? Because, I led skincare product development teams in my Procter & Gamble days. And I don't want to look, it's one thing to not feel old, but you don't want to look old and tired either. So I shared my skincare protocol. How do you trigger multiple skin repair mechanisms, but using relatively inexpensive products, but doing it very intelligently? So I talk about that. I talk about how do you do intermittent fasting. I talk about all the strategies that I'm following. I teach other people. So that's where that's at. I appreciate you, passing that information along.
No, I mean, look, the whole point is usefulness. How could it be that you have somebody like you who is a scientist, who has the drive to continually find the latest and best and use it on yourself because you are driven to have a long, what you call health span? Yeah. How could we not want to benefit from it? It's crazy. Of course we do.
Well, I know, I've been at a few events with you in Los Angeles and in other cities. And I know when we get to the break, I always have, 3 people standing there. Some of them are MDs and some of them are entrepreneurs, but they're always like, okay, John, what about this? What about that? Is this real? Is this real? How does this work? Where do you buy it? It's fun for me. I'm into this stuff. I'm a nerd. I like to understand molecular mechanisms, but the trick is translating it so people can get it. Not too much jargon, not too many technical terms, just the essence so they get it. And then what do you do about it? How do you take action? Because we're all busy. You need to, you can't spend a day figuring something out. You need me to bring it down. So it's going to take you 6 minutes.
Exactly. That is so true. I mean, when I was looking at our interview schedule, I had a selfish glee. I said, oh, I'm going to get a couple of new tips that I can, incorporate in my life. Of course, it's very useful.
Yeah, I have one more thing that it's not as important as the D in magnesium, but it can help you on the COVID front. Maybe we just throw that out as a little bonus item, and that is, you hear a lot about zinc, and some people think it's all anecdotal. Other people think it's a godsend. And I've had hundreds of people say, John, what's your take on it? And the answer is that zinc, if you can get it inside the cell, it shuts down the copy machine, this enzyme called replicase that the virus uses to make copies of itself. So I have a slide that says, replicase enzyme, paper jam tray number 2, because the coronavirus goes in and tries to make copies of this genetic material, and it can't do it because zinc jams it up. But the challenge is zinc cannot go through a membrane. You need to wrap up that +2 charge. And so if I tell people that I take zinc along with some quercetin, because quercetin is a zinc ionophore that will cover up the charge and get it inside the cell. So I believe that zinc is real. I don't think you should take massive amounts. I only take 15 milligrams a day. I think the RDA for men is about 9. And I take it along with 1 milligram of copper because I don't want to screw up my zinc copper balance. But zinc, along with the zinc ionophore and quercetin and EGCG, one of the active ingredients in green tea, both of those will help get the zinc inside the cell. And another thing which is important is people buying a low-cost pulse oximeter, because you want to know if you're feeling badly, is your oxygen saturation level starting to drop? Because if it is, if you feel like you're getting sick and your O2 saturation starts to drop, you want to get in and get treated quickly. You have to kill these things when they're small. You don't want to let it go from thousands to millions to billions to trillions. The deeper it gets into you, the more damage it does. So I think a pulse oximeter makes a lot of sense. And I think zinc, along with the zinc ionophore, again, makes a lot of sense. I just want to throw those out because it's such a critical time right now.
Okay, so
and
what is zinc ionophore?
A zinc ionophore is something that can chelate the zinc. So zinc plus 2, it will wrap it up and make it fat soluble so it can dissolve into the membrane and get inside the cell.
So that's the quercetin, and that's the
quercetin and the EGCG are both zinc ionophores. And if you look at Dr. Zelenko's work out of New York, he's a family physician that has had great success treating COVID. He used hydroxychloroquine as the zinc ionophore. So he used a low dose of hydroxychloroquine because that's also a very good zinc ionophore to get the zinc inside the cell. And mechanistically, he thinks the zinc is more important than the hydroxychloroquine. It's the vehicle that delivers it inside the cell. So.
Yeah. So regarding zinc, obviously, if people take too much zinc, that could be detrimental in ways. And in fact, I believe that there's something called a zinc tolerance test that you can buy for like a few bucks, and you actually take, I believe, a tablespoon and see what your reaction is after 10 seconds. What does that?
Yeah, I haven't looked into that, but to your first point, zinc and copper are both required by the body, and they both get absorbed through the same doorway, through the same pathway. And if you start taking 50 or 75 milligrams of zinc every day, the zinc is going to crowd out the copper, and it's very possible that you will drive your copper levels low. And that's a really bad thing because you will not be able to make the myelin sheaths on your nerves. So you'll have neurological issues potentially. You also will see your LDL cholesterol go through the roof because low copper can drive your LDL cholesterol up. So you don't want to screw up your copper. So taking them in a 15-to-1 ratio, 15 milligrams of zinc, 1 milligram of copper, it prevents you from screwing that up. And you're also taking such a low dose that you're not going to drive, toxicity. But one last point, anyone that has Wilson's disease, which is a genetic defect of copper metabolism, they should never take copper ever. Luckily it's only, I think, 1 in 30,000 people. But if you've ever been diagnosed with Wilson's disease, you cannot take any copper because your body can't handle it. So just to be aware of that. Most people that have Wilson's disease realize it. They know that they can't take copper, but I just want to reiterate that because that would be a potential downside for that one person in 30,000.
Well, John, I don't know what to say. I feel that already I got stuff that is very tangible, very practical, and yet profoundly useful for our health. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope very much to have another talk with you in the future. It was delightful. I appreciate that you took time. I know you're very much in demand. I appreciate you took the time to be here. Thank you so much, John.
Well, I always enjoy our conversations. You ask great questions. I love our back and forth. I do hope that this will be helpful for people. And, you know, that's my mission now is I want to teach other people how to get on the path that I'm on because, you know, I want to be you know, right now I want to be a 30-year-old, 60-year-old. When I get to 80, I want to be a 40-year-old, 80-year-old. So I want to show people it is possible to age very differently and to keep that health span going and not deal with the chronic disease, the type 2 diabetes, the Alzheimer's, the Parkinson's, the cardiovascular disease. That is a disaster. And I will do anything to avoid that. So great to see you. Thanks so much for, you know, the time to, you know, get together like this. It's fun.
All right, John. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For more helpful videos like this, join my free community at adielgorel.com or click the link below.